Well, hello everyone. I know that most of you are probably finishing up in school with your kids, and so I know that this will be recorded and we'll send out the link to you. So I'm going to go over on this date. So this is the Friday, March 22nd webinar. I know everyone is happy it's Friday. And this is the table of contents for your electronic portfolio that at the end of your final exhibition, you're actually going to give me on a flash drive, and everything will be in a Word document that's easily accessible so that I can review it. So the first part obviously is going to be the goal or your goals from the TESOL rubric. So if you have more than one goal, it would be, all your goals. And for each of the goals, or you would actually and we'll talk about the reflective essay that shapes that, but you'd put your goals first. And it's based on the rubric, just the way we did it the first day, where it has the performance indicator and the levels and the descriptors. As you remember, mine was about enhancing the capacity of LEAs to support English learners. So, and I put down exceed the standard. So that was kind of my goal and what I was focusing on. Okay, then the evidence that you collected for each goal, which would be, student work with your lesson and your unit plans. So whatever your goal was and whatever evidence you're using. So for me, that would be the redesign of the self-evaluation tool, as well as the classroom observation tool and the application for funding, and a sample of the finalized report that's uploaded into the grants management system, and then the template for the response of the LEAs in relationship to the recommendations that are divided in two parts. So I would put that as the evidence for the goal of enhancing the capacity for LEAs to address the needs of English learners and use resources effectively related to individual learning needs. And then the third part of your portfolio is your student profile. And at the end of this agenda, I have also the questions that I've sent out to you about what that would consider. And the last time we met, you got some feedback on the first draft of the student profile. So whether it's the second or the first draft, because you might not have been there, it's due April 1st to me as an attachment, and it has to be in a Word document. I know many people do sharing of things through Google Drive, but at USBE we have security issues related to that, and so we don't use Google Drive. So you have the goals from the rubric, organized exactly the way it's organized in the rubric in relationship to performance indicator, and then levels of meeting the standard or exceeding the standard. Then you'd have evidence for each of the goals, and then you'd have your final draft in your portfolio of your student profile. And then the next thing you would have is your reflective essay. And I really would like to see an initial draft of that, because that's really the point of having quality work. So the draft is due on May 1st. It's 12-point font, double space, typical essay, expository, explanatory formats. So here are the questions. And I'll make sure, and these were in the email that I sent to everybody, but I'll send it again in a form of this attachment. So which goal are you using for your final exhibition? Why this goal? Now, for people who have more goals, you would pick one goal, and you would say why it is that you picked this goal. Describe what you have done over the year to focus on your goal and classroom practices. Or if you're an administrator, in relationship to the work that you've done at your school with a group of teachers, because I know that's, one participant has done that. What evidence did you collect to show growth toward meeting or exceeding the standard? So remember, the top part is the collection. It's, you're actually putting in what it is that you've done, your documents, right? So the documentation and the evidence. This is a reflection. So this is an essay that systematically analyzes, you know, and gives you a guide for what you want to talk about in relationship to your final exhibition. How has your work this year changed the way you think about your profession as a teacher of English learners? Now remember, the question is about the way in which you're thinking about your profession, specifically related to a teacher of English learners, or whatever your role happens to be. What other questions does this bring up for you as a career educator? So you generate those questions. And then we go to this part that's really critical. So you've done this reflective essay, you've gathered evidence, you've developed goals, you've gotten feedback on your student profile. So what would you consider, you know, that's been your most significant learning? And in your final exhibition, that's what you're going to focus on. And that significant learning in the final exhibition, in the protocol that we're going to use, is what would you consider a success as defined in the success analysis protocol. And so then we'll see below. So that's connected to your significant learning. And this is a reminder in relationship to the student profile, using the WIDA student report on one boy and one girl. Now remember, every single person who has English learners in the data gateway has an individual WIDA student report that I hope you've downloaded and looked at. You select one boy and one girl. What do you think about this student as a learner? Family, community, culture. What student data are you using to adjust your instruction to support each student, which is, you know, the boy and the girl? And remember, you're protecting the identity. This is kind of a research inquiry process. So you're not going to name the student. You can do the initials. How are you adjusting what you do for each student? Who will you ask for support? Now, the reason this is important is, you know, oftentimes this burnout factor in relationship to how hard teachers are working and the results they see. And so their tendency oftentimes is not to ask for support or to use their PLC work or their grade level teams or whatever. So this is a way for you to think more strategically in relationship to creating a community of learners and who that is in your school community. So what progress do you see or have you seen, and how are they making their written work better? Now, if you notice, the focus here is on student work. It's on written work. One of the biggest issues in relationship to language acquisition is, you know, in the early phases of English proficiency, or proficiency in any language for that matter, there's that silent phase where you're listening. And that's connected to chunking reading so that comprehension is connected to listening, purposeful listening as well as purposeful reading. And then lots of first basic interpersonal communication, you know, that's low stress, and then increased and well-structured teaching of academic conversations related to the use of academic vocabulary in whatever content area that you're in. And so the biggest leap then is from using academic conversation about the things that you've read and then translating that into written work, which is really the most challenging. And then the feedback in relationship to making it better so that students actually understand what quality work looks like. And I can give you some really concrete examples of that. I saw this brilliant teacher at East High who used a really interesting word, draconian, and then based on the academic word, they had read an article before about a student who got in trouble for doing something. And so then the writing prompt was, and this was level 2 ELD kids from all kinds of different countries, so multiple languages. And she had organized them in pairs so they could then go back and read what they had read before, but not until they had started a rough draft telling and describing a situation in which they actually found themselves being punished for a mistake. And so the topic was something like, what do you think about draconian punishment used for teenagers who make a mistake? So you see how she used the language, which is academically challenging, but then she put it in the context of a text based on a theme related to punishment for a teenager, and then use that as a way to generate ideas for writing a first draft. Then she had them step back and identify, based on taking a step back and looking at their own editing skills in relationship to when they get stuck, who they would ask for help and how they would change. And she also identified, it was a review of the kinds of work that they had been doing in tenses to make their work coherent in relationship to past tense and present tense if something has happened in the past. So that's just a concrete example of a really well-structured design of a text used as the basis for a theme to incorporate academic vocabulary. And then she had them read their first drafts and ask questions of each other, and then go back to the text and do marginally and mark on the text. So this is just a concrete example of some of the things that I've actually seen that are effective in relationship to creating students' abilities to be more self-regulating related to explicit development of their editing skills for writing, because writing is always really an incredible challenge. So that's just a reminder of the written student profile using the WIDA student report and other sources of data to track a student's progress, and ultimately toward better written, using academic conversation and then transitioning into creating better written work, because that ends up being one of the kind of gatekeepers for post-secondary education. Okay, so then also I put down the links. And remember, all this is included in the email that I send out to you to announce this webinar. There are the links to the other webinars. And so make sure that you have watched all the webinars. I think there are actually 3. And then you write a brief summary of each for your portfolio that highlights what you were thinking about after watching each. So it's not a summary of the webinar, but it's what you're thinking after you've watched it. So webinars to watch or rewatch or review for a written response, and then I've given you the links. And that's in your portfolio as well. This is just a resource. And again, the reason I included this was the WIDA key uses documents are really important for your grade level, because the WIDA key uses actually identifies students at the proficiency levels and then creates learning tasks based on what they can do, and gridded in a really important way in relationship to the language, how language functions in a classroom, which is recount, explain, discuss, and argue. And that goes across content levels. It doesn't really matter what it is. If it's in mathematics, it's the same thing. About recounting, which is kind of DOK level 1, and then going up to using evidence in relationship to making a claim and justifying your reasoning, whether it's something in history or something in a mathematical solution or whatever it happens to be. Okay, so we're going to go over the protocol for the final exhibition. So you're going to do all this initial work, and then on your flash drive you'll have all this. And then the way in which your final exhibition is, it's actually going to be a success analysis protocol. So we'll be in a large group. Actually, we're going to divide it up because the team that actually came from the Utah International Charter, they're going to do it earlier in May, and they're going to do it together as a team after school. So it'll be, which ends up being a little bit better because we're dividing the group up. And then the people who will do the exhibition together at the University of Utah in June will be able to have something that's like 6 and 6 or 5 and 5, something like that. And this is what the success analysis is. So I'll be the facilitator, so you won't have to be anxious about it. And my role is to help the group keep focused on how the success described by the presenter is different from routine work, different from what you usually do. So that's kind of the whole point of doing the reflective essay, thinking about your students in relationship to the profile work that you've done. So the analysis of what made this so successful is the purpose of the protocol. So we're trying to look at the conditions under which you had that you actually had a successful experience and what you define as success, which is the next part. So I'm actually not going to participate. I might do a little participation in the protocol. We'll just kind of play it by ear. But success is defined as something that proved to be highly effective in achieving an outcome important to the presenter. Now remember, the outcome is based on the goal or whatever it is that you've identified that you're going to share with us. So participants should focus only on the success of the presenter's work and avoid any comments that could be perceived as a criticism or any suggestions. Okay, so this is different than the tuning protocol. The function of the tuning protocol is to get both warm and cool feedback so that you can tune up your work, right, make it better. The point of this is to actually identify the conditions of success and why that success is different than kind of what you've always done and routine, right? So why is it so successful? Based on your actual goal and the outcome of that, the evidence that you used, or whatever you want to use. And so if you look at the way the protocol goes, you identify a success related to your TESOL goal. That's 5 minutes. And the way you do this is to get prepared for the protocol. You actually write a short description of a success before the protocol. Now, the protocol and the person who's created this, and I've used this many times in the 1990s with people all over the country, it gives you a little note, and it says, you might really want to specify, the area for the success. So is it in terms of your work as a teacher, as a learning community, as an administrator, a facilitator, whatever it happens to be, with a specific student or using a teaching strategy. And remember, this is all based on, what you as the presenter is defining as a success in relationship to the outcome of your goal. Describe the specifics of the success. Be sure to answer the question, what made this experience so different from others like it that you've had? Okay, so remember, this is the idea that we're looking at conditions that are creating a success toward what your goal is. So the presenter describes the success, 5 minutes. The presenter tells the story of his or her success in as much detail that she can remember, and the group take notes. Now, we're probably going to combine these two things because my assumption is that you'll be writing you'll be prepared. Your short description will be prepared already. Okay, and then, like the tuning protocol, the group asks clarifying questions. The rest of the group about the details of the success in order to fill in any information the group needs to be helpful to the presenter. So remember, in clarifying questions, you're just trying to better understand the context. So, very simple questions. And then the group asks questions that help the presenter reflect on the success. So the purpose of these questions is different. So one is about clarifying, the first part is about clarifying the context because we want to be helpful to the presenter, but we also want to understand it. So we're just going to ask clarifying questions. And the second part of the questions, this is kind of reflective questions. So the goal really is to help the presenter, through the question, uncover why this was so successful, to see more in the success. We're focusing on the success. And how do you determine this as being successful? What made it successful? What was the impact on the students? So the presenter answers the question, but there isn't any back and forth discussion in the group. Okay, so we're asking the questions. Here's some samples. So, why do you think this student reacted that way? What was different about the quality of the work that was produced than what usually is produced? Why did you decide to, you see, those are different kinds of questions because the why questions are interesting because they're going to, they're focusing on reasoned judgment based on the actual context for the success, right? The conditions. Okay, so then the group reflects on the success story. So again, the presenter removes himself or herself from the group, turns his back to take notes. The group members discuss what they heard the presenter say and offer additional insights and analysis of the success. The presenter is silent and take notes. So you're actually reflecting, you're discussing together. It's not this idea of, okay, now we're going to do warm feedback and then we're going to do cool feedback, right? You're just offering additional insights in relationship to the conditions that made this experience successful for the presenter, related on the goal and the evidence that was collected. Okay, so after that, the presenter reflects 5 minutes on the group's discussion about what made this so successful. The group then discusses briefly how they have learned, have what they have learned be applied to their own work. Now, see, this is the thing that's different. The goal here is for application. We're looking at conditions. So it'd be something like, well, what I noticed in what was done, there were high expectations, but there was also opportunities for the students to be emotionally engaged in what they produced, to represent the poetry of their experience without being defined as a refugee. I'm thinking in particular of one of the participants. Okay, so then the last one, which is 7, debrief the protocol, the presenter comments first. Okay, again, so we hear from the presenter in relationship to what the presenter heard us talk about in relationship to applying the conditions of success to what we're now thinking about our own practice. Okay? There's a little bit more challenging protocol than the tuning. But it always works, and it's always incredibly insightful because we're doing a high level of analysis, but it's actually based on the underlying assumption that we're identifying conditions for success that might have implications or that will have implications in an application to our own context. Like, this is what I've learned from listening to, right? So you kind of say it that way. Okay, and so this is helpful where after the final portfolio exhibition, so after the success analysis, we're all celebrating, a link to the final self-assessment and the course feedback will be available before the grades are submitted in June. So I'll send out to everybody a self-assessment so you can actually reflect on it. It'll be in a SurveyMonkey so we can so I can be able to analyze the data, which will also include course feedback. And this is a requirement. So the point is, I cannot give you a grade in reviewing your portfolio, in reviewing your success analysis, our actual experience together, until your portfolio is submitted and you complete the final self-assessment in the survey, as well as the course feedback. And then, obviously, in the University of Utah, they have a system with course evaluation as well, which you really should fill out as honestly as, very honestly. This is the whole point, is we're all learning together. And then I look at those things and consider everything, and then your grade is submitted in June. There's always a deadline at the University of Utah. So once we finished by the end of June, you should have not only your grade, which, and I'll give you some feedback on that, will range obviously from an A to a B. My assumption is the work that you've done is, beyond the level of average. With the criteria, the final self-assessment, you'll actually see that pretty clearly. And then, based on everything that you've accomplished and the learning that you've done, where you'll assess yourself, and then the way the self-assessment is organized, you assess yourself, and then I do a weighted assessment, and then we average the grade. And the reason that happens is oftentimes there are people who underestimate themselves because they have such high expectations, and so to mitigate that, I do a double weighting. Let's see. I think that pretty much does it for this webinar. Please watch it. I'll send this out with the success analysis protocol and a reminder after our wonderful Jerry Record in the studio gives me a link. And then I'll send it out to everybody probably on Monday. I hope you have a really great weekend. Thank you. This has been a really wonderful experience. The experience I had doing a tuning protocol at Monticello Charter School was quite wonderful and really an exceptional experience. And so I'm anxious to hear how the rest of the tunings went from that school. Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate all your work.